So hi, in this video we will see that how we can manage a state in React. But before this we need to understand what state is. So state is a JavaScript object which store data in the form of key value pair. So state is a JavaScript object which keep track of dynamic data, the data that changes over the time, and whenever there is change in data, state will trigger a re-render the functional component, and the updated value will be visible in the UI. So let me explain you this by a counter application. So there is an application which contains a heading and a button. Heading will reflect the value of count, and there is a button. When someone click on this button, the value of this count will increase by 1. Okay, so initially the value of count is 0. Okay, so when someone click on this button, let's say I click on this button, so now the value of count will be 1, right? So here let's say again I click on this button, so now the value of count will become 0. So here count has a dynamic data, and this dynamic data will be handled by state, right? Okay, so initially the state of the count was 0, and when someone click on this button, the state of count again changes and it becomes 1, right? So there is a change in data, and whenever there is a change in data, the state will re-render the functional component. So this component will re-render again, and it will now show the updated value of the count as 1, right? So this is what state is, right? So we need to understand that how we can manage state in React. So we need to know that how we can manage the dynamic data and show that dynamic data into the UI, right? Okay, so we will see this by making a counter application. So let's jump to the VS Code and let's create a counter application. Then we will see that how we can manage the state there. Okay, so let's create the counter application. Either we can write the logic for counter application into a different component, or we can write into the app component itself. For now we can write the logic into the app component. Okay, so we want two things: to have a heading that will display the count value and a button. Okay, that's it. So first we need a heading to display count, and its initial value is 0. Okay, now we want, is there any, okay, next what we want, then we want a button. Let's say it says increase value by 1. Okay, let me remove this. So this is the basic UI we created. We just want two things: a button that when someone click on the button, so the value of count should increase by 1, and the heading that will display the value of count. Okay, this is 2, I guess. So this should be 2 here. Okay, now we haven't write any logic for increasing the value of count by 1. Okay, so let's see how we can add the logic. So we know that there must be a variable that will store the value of count, because we need to click on the button and the value of count will keep on updating by 1, right? So we need to create a variable. So first create a variable, let's say let count, and its initial value will be 0. Now what we want, that when someone clicks on the button, we want to increase the value by 1. So first we need to add a listener. So we will click on click event on the button. So what we want, that when someone click on this button, a function runs, let's say handle click. So till now what we have done, we have created a count variable. Why a count variable? Because we know that we have to store somewhere the value of count because when someone click on this button, the value will increase by 1 and we need to store it somewhere. So that's why we have created a variable count and its initial value is 0. And we need to add an event, so we are using on click for button. So we want when someone click on the button, a function run, a function invoke, handle click function. So let's create the function handle click. Okay, so what this handle click function does is it will increase the value of count by 1. And also let's write a log statement that says the value of count is, let's see what the value of count when we click on the button. So let me use this count variable here. Okay, also we haven't used anywhere in our UI this count variable, so we need to use it here because we need to show the updated value of the count, right? So in curly braces we can use this variable here. So till now I hope this is clear to you that we have used a heading that will display the value of count. So that's why we have used the count variable in curly braces, because its value will be updated by the handle click function, and handle click function will be called when someone clicks on the button, right? So let's see if this is working or not. Where is the project? Okay, so let's see. Let's run the command npm run dev. Okay, so let me open this link here. So see, that's how our UI looks like. There is a heading that will display the value of count and a button that will increase the value of count by 1. Also the console has the whole statement in our code. So let's see console. Okay, so what we want that just give me a second. Okay, so what we want, a heading will display the value of count. So there is, okay, so what we want that when someone click on this button, our handle click function will invoke, and handle click function will increase the value of this count variable and will give a log statement, will print a log statement, and in the UI the updated value of the count should be visible. So let's see if this is working or not. So when I click on this button, the value of count is 1. The value of count is updated, but in UI it doesn't. Let me click this again. Again the value of count in the console is increasing by 1, but in the UI there is no change in the value. Why? Because let me erase this. Why there is no change in the UI but in console the value has changed? Because we haven't updated the DOM in a project. We haven't updated the DOM. As you can see, we have using a normal JavaScript variable, and if you know to make changes in the UI, we need to make changes in the DOM in JavaScript. So we need to use a event listener like add event listeners and get element by ID, class name, or by ID. So here we are not updating the DOM, right? So that's why there is no change in the UI, because in JavaScript whenever we want to make changes in the UI we need to update the DOM. But how we can update the UI if we don't use normal variable in JavaScript to update the UI? So here there is a concept of hooks. So what hooks are? So hooks are basically function that provide us some React features, and one of the feature it provide us to manage the state. Okay, so the issue we are encountering is that we are able to update the value of count, but it is updating in the console but not in the UI. So how we can update the UI if we are not directly updating the DOM? So we can use hooks there. And what are hooks? Hooks are basically function that provide us some additional React feature, and one of the feature it provide us to update the state, right? Okay, so let's see. Okay, so as we have discussed, state is a JavaScript object which will keep track of dynamic data, and whenever there is change in data, it will trigger and re-render the functional component. And whenever functional component re-rendered, the updated value will be visible in the UI, right? That's what we want to do in our counter application. In our counter application, the UI is not updating. It means our component is not re-rendering, right? We know that data is changing. Data has changed from value 1 to value 2. When someone click on the button, the value of count is changing. The data is dynamic, but that dynamic data does not create any trigger and does not re-render the component. That's why UI is not updating. So we can use hooks there. So there are different types of hook, provide different types of functionality. So to manage the state, we use state hook. We use state hook. So this hook provide us the functionality to get the same result. It will make a trigger, and whenever there is a trigger, the functional component will re-render and give us the updated value in the UI. So how do we use state hook? So let's first understand its syntax. Let me erase this. So let's first see its syntax. So first we need to import the use state hook. So as we know, hooks are the special function that provide us some React functionalities. So use state is one of its functionality, and we can get it from React. So import use state from React. So first we need to import it. Then what we need to do? We need to use state into our component. How? There is a syntax that we need to follow. So use state. Where is the pen? So use state takes a initial value. What does this mean? I will explain you. Use state takes the initial value. Let's say its initial value is 0, and it gives us a destructured array that contains two values: a state variable and a method. What does this mean? It means that first we need to import the use state hook, then we need to use the use state hook into our component, and use state hook takes initial value, some initial value. It can be 0, it can be any boolean value, an empty array, an object, anything, depends upon your state variable. Now what is state variable? State variable is such a variable that's value that shows dynamic data. It means in our case, counter shows dynamic data. Initial its value was 0. When someone clicks on the button, its value increased by 1, so it will show 1. Then it value again increased by 1. When someone clicks on the button, it will show 2. So state variable is such a variable which shows dynamic data. That's value keeps on changing, right? Okay. So what I just told you that use state takes an initial value. So whose initial value is this? So this is the initial value of a state variable. In our case, the state variable is count, right? Okay. And what is method? So method is a function. So this is basically a function that will help us to make a trigger and updates the value of our state variable. Let me explain you this again. What I just said, that use state takes up an initial value. Use state takes an initial value, and this is the initial value of which variable? The state variable. And what is a state variable? That variable which value keeps on changing, right? Okay. And it will take a method. This method will help us to update the value of this state variable. Okay. This method will trigger and updates the value of state variable. Okay. So if I write, let's say in our case, the state variable is count because उसकी value change हो रही है. And then we want a method. Now there is a convention to name the method. To name the method, we first need to write set in prefix, set, and then the state variable name, count. I know it is not understandable right now, so let's say our state variable name is age. So how we can write the method name? First in prefix we need to write set and then the name of the state variable age. Let's say the name of our state variable is name. Then how we can write the name of our method? First we need to write set and then we need to write name. So this is how we can give name to our method. So let's say count, and the method of the method name would be set count. And then user state will take some initial value, and the initial value of count we want to give is 0. So that's what does it mean. I think this is clear to you right now. So let's go back to the VS Code. Now let me remove this because we know that we don't use JavaScript variables to update the UI in React. So let me remove this also, and this also. So first what we need to do? First we need to import user state. So let's first import user state. Import use state from React. Okay, then what we need to do? Then we need to use user state. So user state takes an initial value. In our case, the initial value of a count variable is 0. User state takes up the initial value of a state variable. In our case, the state variable is count and its initial value is 0. Okay, it will give us a destructured array value, and this it contain two values, a state variable, let's say count, and a method set count. Okay, now we know set count will help us to update the value of the count, count. Okay, so how we can use this now in our UI? Also, we need to use first we need to import the user state, then we need to use the user state into our functional component, or you have to use this in the functional component, not outside of this functional component. Okay, we need to use this user state inside the functional component, not outside the functional component. Okay, now how we can use this? We know that this count variable is reflecting the actual value of the count, and initially the value of the count is 0, count. So we can use count variable here, count, count. This will give us the current value of this count variable, and the current value of the count variable is 0. So let's see till now this working or not. Okay, if I give my count variable value as 10, so let's see if this works or not. Okay, so here the value of the count, initial value of count is 10. Okay, so now let's go to VS Code. And how can we use set count? Because set count will make the trigger and update the UI. So we want, when someone clicks on button, an event should occur, and that event should be on click. And I want, when someone clicks on this button, a function invoke. Let's say the name of the function is handle click, handle handle click. So let me create a function there. Let me use fat arrow function handle click, and will click on this button. This handle click function will invoke, and what this handle click function does is it should increase the value of count by 1, and we know that this method set count will help us to increase the value of count variable by 1. So we can directly use set count, and what the set count was meant to do is increase the value of count by 1. Okay, let me also use our log statement here. The value of count is, and see what its value is, count. Okay, so what we have done till now is, first we have imported use state hook, then we have used use state hook, and it takes up an initial value, and let's say the initial value of count is 0. It will give a destructured array, and it will take two value, a count variable, a state variable whose value will keeps on changing over the time, that contains dynamic data, and a method that help us to update the value of count in the UI. Okay, so in the UI there is a heading that display the value of count, and a button. When someone click on this button, a handle click function invoke, and handle click function will call set count and increase the value of count by 1 and print a log statement. So let's see if this is working or not. Let me refresh this. Okay, so if I click on this button, so see here the UI has updated, right? So it the value of count is increased by 1, but here in console the value is still 0. Why? If in the UI the count has increased in the value by 1, now in the console it is still 0. When I click on the button, here the value is 2, here value has increased, but in the UI it's 2 and in the console it's 1. Why is there a mismatch in the value? So it is because when the very first time when the component rendered, so when for the first time when the component rendered, this variable created, a count variable is created for the first time, and this shows us the value of count, and the value of count is 0. So when I click on this button, so what happens here is, when I click on the button, there was a button, when I click on the button, the component re-rendered again, but this time this variable is not created again, because in the first time rendered it has been created, so in the re-rendering part it will not created it again, right? So when I click on this button, a handle click function will invoke, and handle click function will increase the value of count by 1. Initially the value of count is 0, so now the value of count will be 1. But what happens here is, React.js directly don't update the value. It will update the value in the UI after this function ends. So that's why here the count is 1. It's still 0 here, because it will update the UI, it will update the value of the count when this function will end. Okay, so that's why here still it is 0. So how this works? At the second time when we click on this button, this handle function invoke, and this handle function increase the value count by 1. Still this function is running, so that's why the value of count is 0. And when this function ends, now the value of count here is 1. And let's say again I click on this button, this handle click function invoke, and this handle function will increase the value by 1, so now it will become 2. But still this function is running, so that's why here the value of count is still 1. And now this function ends, so this UI will be updated, and here the value of our count will be 2, right? And when again this process happens again and again, when someone click on this button. Okay, so that's how render and re-rendering work. In a re-render, this variable is created only in the first time, and this UI will be visible on the screen. When someone click on this button, handle click will invoke, and set count will be trigger. Now we know that set count will help us to update the value of this count variable, and this count is a state variable, so it will trigger and re-render the component. So when component re-render, this will increase the value of the count by 1, but after this function end, then only in the with the UI this value of count is updated. Okay, so that's how we can manage a state in React.js by using use state hook. So we don't use normal variables to update the UI, because then we need to use the DOM, then we need to update the DOM. So that's how we can use state hook into a functional component to update the UI. So that's it. Thank you.